We've seen Good Cop, Bad Cop, now get ready for Good Cop, Skrull Cop. Secret Invasion, starring Nick Fury and Talos, was one of the gazillion shows announced on that epic Disney Investor Day. But if done right, it could be the next big MCU event. The original comic series changed everything by revealing the Skrulls had secretly infiltrated Earth and replaced high-ranking officials and superheroes galore. But how will that work in the MCU? In today's episode of CBR Saga, we'll be talking about how the MCU can adapt Secret Invasion with a few tweaks, and discussing who might have already been replaced. Just who can you trust? I'm joined by my co-host and I think good friend, but a potential Skrull, Nick. Nick, how you doing today?
I'm doing good. Your name was Jacoby?
Oh, yes. See, okay. that proves that you are definitely you because you know my name.
Yes, yep. I knew that. I'm doing well. Thank you for asking. Thank you for having me.
Of course. I'm excited to talk about Secret Invasion overall because I think when they announced this show amidst, all of the other shows that they announced on that day where it's like our brains went into overload, this one kind of actually stood out to me because I think Secret Invasion is an event series, It's one that really does include so many different heroes and the world overall instead of just, specifically focusing on one individual hero. What were your thoughts when Secret Invasion was announced?
So, first of all, I recognized the title right away, and I had to do some digging as to what Secret Invasion was and sort of refresh my memory. It is definitely the type of topic to be this big event thing. I was a little weary when they said it was going to be a TV show, so if they're going for like the next Avengers Endgame to be a series, that is a bold move, and I'm actually really excited to see it play out. And the other thing that really excited me about it is Samuel L. Jackson's been around since the first Iron Man, and it looks like he's just sticking around the entire time.
Yeah, it's not like one of those things like Endgame's like, oh, let's slowly retire this character and focus on new characters. Like, nope, Nick Fury is here. And now he's just getting the spotlight after over 10 years of just side character roles. Now he's finally getting his time to shine. And that's great. I love Nick Fury, and I think it would be so interesting to see it focus on him.
No, I'm really excited, and I honestly think this story is the perfect vehicle for him to do that. Because Nick Fury, he's not super powered. He's not like the smartest person in the world. But if there's one thing Nick Fury's good at, it's not trusting people. And he's exactly the type of person to be able to sort of sniff out if a secret invasion were to happen.
Absolutely, because I wholeheartedly agree with that. Because like when you hear the plot of Secret Invasion and of everything that it is, you think that, wow, that's a Nick Fury story if you've ever seen one. Like you would think like the original comic series was all about Nick Fury discovering the untrustworthy heroes on Earth. That's like tailor-made for him. And you have to wonder just like why it didn't focus on Nick Fury before. But I think that's what the MCU does really well, right? It, like when it adapts these famous stories, they're able to tweak it and focus on characters who weren't generally focused on before, but like make them fit into the story a whole lot better. And I think this is another perfect example of that. So I'm excited overall because I think that's great. Of course, that means it's going to have to tweak some things from the original story because the original story is very different, right?
Yes.
Like they can't just say, we're doing Secret Invasion and doing it exactly the same way, right? Because that'd be too hard.
There's characters that they would have to shoehorn in. There's storylines that kind of would have need to already been in effect that aren't. So I definitely think, like we saw with Civil War, like we saw with Infinity War, those things were very different from the comics they were based off of. I think they were adapted in many ways perfectly because you have to change some things. You have to replace characters with characters that already exist, and you have to change characters' motivations in many ways. But the MCU's been so great at that.
And are you generally fine with that? I know there are a lot of comic purists out there just like they should adapt it exactly the way that it's told in the comics because that's such a great story, but I just don't think that's feasible for a lot of time. And I'm generally fine with it as long as it's done in a correct and respectful way and it fits with the story. Feel about that?
No, absolutely. I absolutely agree. And the best example I can point to is not in everyone's favorite movie, but as a person who grew up reading comics, Hank Pym created Ultron. That was one of Hank Pym's greatest flaws. But in the MCU, it was Tony Stark, and that actually worked really well. It made Tony Stark develop more as a character. It didn't give us the greatest villain in Ultron, but I thought it gave us a good villain, and it really set off things in the MCU leading towards the Sokovia Accords. So they're able to use these stories that we recognize and name and that we can pick out aspects of, but adapting it to the story that they are trying to tell.
And that kind of brings us back to Secret Invasion because originally in the comics, it's as a brief overview, Secret Invasion really kicked off with the Illuminati, who we have not seen in the MCU yet, but hopefully we will one day, or at least some variation of it. They're trying to warn the Skrull Empire, the evil Skrulls, because they're evil in the comics mostly, that, don't mess with Earth because we're going to protect it, but then they get captured and studied, which is, I think, is a total failure on their kind of part there. But they're kind of studied, and the leader of the Skrulls is Princess Veranke. Hope I'm pronouncing that right.
Yeah.
They kind of capture them, they study their DNA, and they get a better understanding of how, human and metahuman physiology works. And that allows them to eventually infiltrate Earth. And then the whole thing's kicked off with, I believe it's Electra, who is killed in battle. But when she's killed, it's found out that she's not Electra. She is a Skrull, which creates this whole set of things like, oh gosh, we've been infiltrated. The enemy is here. And then it creates this whole paranoia and sets off, I guess, a chain of events that divides the heroes even more so than they already were, because this is coming, I believe, after Civil War. So, just kick them while they're down, right?
Absolutely. And honestly, this is all the more better reason to have Nick Fury as the star of this, because if you think back to the movie Captain Marvel, he has sort of already experienced this, not in the sense that the Skrulls were the bad guys in that movie, but in the sense that he's riding along with Agent Coulson, who is this new rookie that they picked up recently, dies in a car accident, and he's looking over at an alien. So Nick Fury has already experienced the shock of someone he thinks he knows dying and revealing themselves to be a Skrull. That's why I think Samuel Jackson as Nick Fury is the perfect person to sort of spearhead this.
I agree, and I think, and what I'm really interested in the show exploring is his relationship with Talos, because Talos entered in Captain Marvel in the MCU as you think he's the bad guy because he's played by Ben Mendelsohn, who is always the bad guy, and then he's like, oh, but actually I'm actually a good guy, and I'm actually a political refugee, and I just kind of want to be with my family, and we're outcast here, and we want to be safe, and they're actually the good guys. So now, since the 90s, Fury has been working with Talos very closely with the Skrulls, and now he's developing a sword up in space. But now he's going to be presented with the fact that there are bad Skrulls out there. And I think Fury's relationship with Talos is going to be tested, because he won't quite know what Talos wants out of this. When Talos learns that there is a potentially evil sect of Skrulls on Earth, he's probably going to want to protect them, right? He's probably going to want to save them or understand them, because he's a dying race. He doesn't want to eliminate any of his race anymore, because they're already an endangered species. But then, of course, Nick Fury has kind of proven to be like, oh, this is a threat. We need to eliminate them. I don't care if it's an alien species on the verge of extinction. We gotta protect Earth, right? So I think that's going to set them at odds with each other. And I think that's a central conflict set against the whole world crumbling, that I think is going to make this really awesome.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree. First of all, I knew Ben Mendelsohn wasn't going to be the villain just because he's always the villain. So when they cast him, I was like, you want us to think he's the villain, but he's definitely not. The other thing you have to think of, yes, there was that scene in Far From Home where Talos was like, I was Nick Fury, ha ha ha. But it's been a long time since we've seen Talos. We don't really know officially what the state of the Skrulls are. If they've been prospering. We see Nick Fury on what seems to be their ship, and it actually looks very technologically advanced. So they've made some advances. There's always a possibility that the Skrulls have gone through something else in that long period of time that would turn them evil, because there's really two options. Everyone's been talking about how, you made the Skrulls good guys, you ruined the Skrulls. One, maybe. Two, it's very possible, like you said, that there could be this different group of Skrulls. No group of anything is all good or all bad. So there could be this extremist group that wants to start the secret invasion. The other thing that could happen is Talos himself. I know it's hard to see the way they've set him up, but Talos himself could be the person who kicks this off. He could have developed such a distrust for the people of Earth, for the heroes of Earth, that he could be the one who kicks off this invasion.
Ooh, okay. I like that. I love it when movies kind of do that overall, and TV shows overall, where it's it starts off as good characters, but then slowly turns them bad, because then you understand kind of where they're coming from in a sense, but also it's it really hurts because they're usually friends with our protagonist or anything like that. I think that would be a brutal knife twist, right? if Fury and Talos had this working relationship for so long and then it slowly dissolved.
Right. And you could be right. You could be right. Talos could just be like the third party who's sort of stuck, like both sides are pulling at his arm, and he's got to decide which side to pick. Like if they don't have time to set up like Veranke or like we were talking about with replacing characters, Talos is essentially the leader of what we have seen of the Skrulls. He could very theoretically be that person that says, hey, this other group of Avengers, not including Nick Fury, has said that they are going to wage war on us. They're going to see our destruction. It's time for us to defend ourselves.
You say not including Nick Fury? Because I actually think that could be a good motivation for Talos to turn bad, because he sees Nick Fury expanding his sword operation into space, and Talos realizes like, oh crap, like are we the good guys here? Like it's like is Nick Fury doing what he always does, like what he did back in the first Avengers of using Hydra weaponry, being a little bit shady in the process, and Talos is like, oh, maybe that's not the best thing to do. I got to go off and do my own thing.
That's very possible too. I struggle, especially since the time we've most recently seen them is Talos and Fury are obviously still friends. You know, Talos was doing him a favor so he could go on vacation. So
that's something you do for a friend, right? For a really close friend too.
Absolutely.
Like, that was a very serious job. He goes on vacation right when, you know, Mysterio attacks and there's a huge issue. Instead of calling him up, he's just like, no, I'm going to stay on vacation. You handle this. You know,
he's like, everyone keeps asking me questions. I don't know what to say. And granted, we do have a long time from Far From Home to Secret Invasion. There is a lot of time in there where we could sort of set up a rift between the two of them. But based on what I've seen, I think someone else might have to be the inciting conflict. And then Fury could be the one in the middle where Talos is like, we're going to defend ourselves, Fury, whether you're with us or not. And he's sort of like, well, I'm in charge of the defense of Earth and created sword. And if you're going to attack us, then we're going to defend ourselves right back, kind of thing.
And yeah, no, I love that. And overall, I think that general conflict, that central conflict between Fury and Talos is what's going to turn Secret Invasion from like a really good show to a really great show, like because that's going to be the heart of it, and that they have to get that right in order for this to be successful. And we've talked a lot about Fury and Talos during this, but let's talk about what the people want to hear about for Secret Invasion is who's been replaced. The real fun of Secret Invasion is like finding out, oh, wow, this person was a Skrull the entire time. So let's talk about a few options of who could feasibly be a Skrull, you know, I guess in this time period or being replaced very, very soon. And I think I want to start off with someone you actually mentioned earlier, because I think he is literally the perfect person to replace, is Hank Pym. Because I actually think his role as this very super smart, very well-respected scientist who has access to this unbelievable technology is the perfect person to replace, is Hank Pym. What do you think? Hank Pym, Skrull or no Skrull?
Possible Skrull. Certainly an option. And yes, he is in the comics event. He reveals himself to be a Skrull. And once Mr. Fantastic finds out that like Electra's body was a Skrull and how they were able to avoid detection, that's when Hank Pym sort of reveals himself and essentially decommissions Mr. Fantastic. I think that'd be good. I worry because they've essentially set up Hank Pym as this person, in the MCU at least, as this person who has gone off on his own. Like he is not associated with any sort of government entity or organization, so they would have to do some recruiting between now and Secret Invasion to get Hank Pym sort of back on that side. But you're right, he is that person who has the intelligence, who has the authority in the science world to carry that sort of power. I just would think the Skrulls would go for someone a little more already on the inside. You know what I mean?
Okay, yeah, I definitely see that. Who do you have in mind?
Maybe a Hawkeye could be really interesting. He's sort of gone the Hank Pym path as well of he's on the outside now, he's left the Avengers, he's retired, he's with his family. Could be a really interesting thing where they flip that and make Clint Barton sort of come back to everyone, back like I'm rejoining S.H.I.E.L.D. or I'm gonna join S.W.O.R.D., I'm back with the good guys, only for that to be the actual mole in the whole organization.
I could see that playing out because I see it happening after the Hawkeye TV show, right? Because Hawkeye TV show is going to be him training Kate Bishop and like basically retiring. And then we get Hawkeye's swan song, so to speak. His character arc is complete, right? He trains somebody else.
Right.
So then at the end of his show, kind of, that's when he's replaced. And then in a few years, that's when Secret Invasion, he comes up again, just like, I am this. And then it forces Kate Bishop to kind of take down, so to speak, her mentor, someone who trained her, which I think kind of comes full circle. So I like Hawkeye. I like Hawkeye as an option. I'll throw another name at you because you were mentioning somebody in the science community who's more ingrained with everything. I'm going to swing for the fences here. I'm going to say Professor Hulk, right? Professor Hulk, because at this stage his body is basically broken. He hasn't really done, a lot yet. His character arc, they were going to give him a character arc and then they kind of swept that under the rug. So he doesn't have much to do right now. He'll probably have more to say in She-Hulk and hopefully complete his character arc. But if it doesn't, he is the perfect person to replace as a Skrull, right?
Exactly, you're right, because Hulk has essentially replaced Tony Stark as the leading intelligence, of the good guys. When they wanted to figure out time travel and they went to Tony, he said, no, the next person they go to is the Hulk. So now that Tony's gone, it would make sense that Hulk sort of takes over that role. The only issue I see, and I think it's a problem that needs to be addressed, is the Skrulls in the MCU have been set up to where they cannot mimic powers. They're strong, they fight well, but to mimic, yes, Hulk's got a bad arm, but to mimic the Hulk's strength is something essentially I don't know that the Skrulls can do right now. Remember in Captain Marvel when Fury's like, prove to me you're not a Skrull, and she's like, boom, photon blast. Skrulls can't do that. You either need to adapt the Skrulls to have figured out in this time how to mimic powers, or you're looking at a bunch of people with powers that essentially can't be replaced by Skrulls because all you got to do is say, Hulk, smash something, and when he can't, it's like, okay, you're a Skrull.
Would you accept the fact that, in this time we've adapted, we can mimic powers now, just to make this easier for everybody? They look straight at the camera and says, we can adapt powers now to make this a better story.
Well, I think there is a way they can do that, especially if they do this sort of rogue sect of Skrulls. They could say, while Talos was hanging with Nick Fury, this rogue sect was actually doing research and they were figuring out how to mimic powers. And actually, that could make the fight, the conflict, a whole lot more interesting, because we've talked about Captain Marvel before, who's going to beat Captain Marvel? Someone who can mimic her powers and copy exactly who she is. That could be a good fight.
That's the only one.
So I just wanted to address it, but I think it's a good idea if you have this sort of rogue sect of Skrulls say, hey, not only can we mimic appearances, but we've advanced ourselves to the point where we now know how to mimic powers.
I like that more. Sure, that might be a little bit of an easier way out, just to say oh, sorry, I know we've established these rules, but we're changing them and now they're more advanced. But I just think that creates a better story, because that makes it harder for the heroes, and that's what I want, right? I want a tough challenge for the heroes to actually find out who's who. What is the deciding factor? If someone has their most of their memories, along with that they look the same and act the same and have the same powers, what is it? How can you tell your best friend apart from a Skrull? Right? That's and that should be the central conflict in what Secret Invasion is, to promote this level of paranoia. And that's again, that's what makes this. That's what would make this a really great series. I'm going to throw two more names at you. Something that could potentially happen. It could be jumping the shark, so to speak, but I'm going to see what you think. Okay, Black Widow and Iron Man, they're dead, right? They're dead in the MCU, and they're gone. If they came back and people were so overjoyed to see these characters that they didn't question it as much, and then they have to realize, man, as much as we want Black Widow back, and much as we want this Tony Stark back, we have to face the fact that these are probably Skrulls. What do we do? Do you think that type of storyline could work, or do you think that's too, unbelievable? I think
it could work, and I'm gonna fix the soul, the reason for them being back. Multiverse. Everyone has been suggesting since Gamora came back, quotes around came back, but a new Gamora exists in the main MCU timeline. I don't want that. I don't want them to bring Robert Downey Jr. back and say, hey, Tony Stark's back, he's just from a different universe. I think the most brilliant thing for them to do, and it'd be tough to trick audiences, but is for them to say, hey, Black Widow's back, Tony Stark's back, but they're just from a different universe like Gamora. That would not only convince the audience, but it might convince the characters in the movie. Oh my gosh, Tony, you're alive. Kind of like how Quentin Beck in Spider-Man Far From Home pretended he was from an alternate universe, you just sort of take on that persona, I'm from a new universe that exists exactly 5 seconds behind this one, but don't worry, now I'm back. And then later you reveal that they were lying and they were actually Skrulls, and they've re-infiltrated their way back to where they used to be when they were alive. I love that idea for I guess for the biggest reason I love that idea is because it really paints a picture of the whole MCU. It's this Secret Invasion storyline isn't going to be a small thing, right? It is in its own secluded storyline. It's going to be parallel to whatever else is happening in the MCU, and what else is happening in the MCU is the multiverse. That's where the movies are going, and that's going to be the future of the MCU, hands down. So by introducing the audiences to the multiverse while also parallel going through a Secret Invasion type of storyline is quite brilliant. So I think that's a great idea, because
will have invested in the idea that, yes, there are alternate people out there. Like, they could easily come back. So it makes it 10 times more believable. And man, that is much better than my idea of just like, they just show up one day. It's like, I'm back. Like, you know, like that's it. I think that's great.
I have some characters that are definitely Skrulls.
Okay. Well, 100% hands down Skrulls.
100% confirmed. Morgan Stark. Mr. Dell, the assistant teacher in Spider-Man Far From Home.
Oh, yeah, he's definitely
J.B. Smooth's character. Scott Lang's boss at Baskin Robbins.
That guy did look pretty Skrully.
Definitely a Skrull. But no, for real. My actual pitch, I think, someone who still exists, whose whereabouts we don't actually know, and she's already been assumed by a Skrull in the past. Maria Hill. No one really knows where Maria Hill's at.
That's true.
Now, Soren was essentially doing her a favor. Maybe Fury knows where she is. Like, why would Soren need to take over Maria Hill's persona in Spider-Man Far From Home unless they know where she is? But Maria Hill's the person who's like Fury's second in command. So if Fury creates this sword organization, Maria Hill's probably going to be a high-ranking official in it. She's someone whose powers you wouldn't have to mimic, but she's also someone who's sort of been around since the original Avengers. So you could make it that she's been a Skrull the whole time, and it really wouldn't affect the stories that we've seen so far, other than the knowledge that a Skrull has been around the majority of this time.
I like that because I think you need that, right? Because just to establish the threat of what these Skrulls can do, it's like you need someone who's been a Skrull this entire time to show it's like, oh wow, they know their stuff. Like they know what they're doing here. So I actually think I like that. Maria Hill, sorry, you're a Skrull.
Yep. Hate to break it to you.
Nick, thank you so much for joining me in this Secret Invasion discussion. I think Secret Invasion is going to be great, and I think it could change the face of the MCU as we know it. But what do you all think? Do you think a Secret Invasion is going to be the next big thing? Who do you think is a Skrull? Who can you trust? Let us know in the comments below. Thank you all so much for watching, and we'll see you next time.